This week's case provides kind of a sneak preview into a business model that in the future a lot of us will either be uh, consuming as customers or will be providing as suppliers. As you know, individual robots can be very expensive, and it's unlikely that we're going to see organizations that just kind of are able to buy them and maintain them themselves. So it's probable that there will be companies whose entire business model is to just develop and provide robots as a service. So robot as a service is what Cobalt does. That is, they provide the hardware and the remote human specialists, and then also the AI software. So this case is interesting because it's kind of a new thing, and they faced unique problems. Particularly when it came to actually, the cash conversion cycle. I'll get to that in just a little bit. So these robots that they provided were specifically designed to take over a very physical kind of manual operation, and that is to provide security. So we have these humans who kind of monitor a facility. They are able to walk around and, check various things, look for anything suspicious, listen for anything suspicious. And so this provides a great opportunity for a robot, because robots can move, they can detect the environment, there's object detection, there's anomaly detection. So there's a lot that a robot could take on in terms of the security. So this is why Cobalt saw this opportunity. So that they've got these robots that they make have 60 sensors, and so here's a picture of one. I think it's a really nice looking robot. I think they chose a nice design, and they chose a good size. And what they put on here was really in response to what, some problems that they saw. So they said, okay, well, this thing needs to be able to hear. So if somebody's drilling their way through the front door, they need to be able to hear that. If there's, if there's something going on that's unusual, so there's some kind of anomaly, it should be able to see it at a high enough definition that they can send that data and maybe do some processing of it and do something about it, or report it at the very least. So it needed to have a camera. So you can see that it supplied 60, over 60 sensors. So it's got multiple cameras. It does have a GPU, which it needs because it needs to be able to navigate. Or no, sorry, it's not a GPS, a GPU, that is a graphics processing unit. It can, humans give off heat. So if there's a human who shouldn't be if there's a human where they shouldn't be, then this thing can detect it. And then, of course, a typical barcode reader, so it can scan IDs. So the robot itself was specifically designed for covering, to reduce the costs. So the problem here with security guards is that you have these large facilities like warehouses and data centers that need to have a person, and there are problems. These guards can be expensive. The costs were kind of surprising. For typical, if you're going to have round-the-clock security for with five guards, 24/7, you're paying $500,000 a year. So they are expensive. And humans have certain frailties. They get bored, especially when 99% of the time, as in security, nothing happens. Sometimes they're inattentive, or I was interested to find that some security guards actually help, commit some robberies as a way of making some side income. And and so they're hard to recruit. So they were solving a real world problem with a neat kind of modern technical solution. Earlier attempts to have a sheerly technical approach to security kind of flopped because they don't really provide any kind of psychological deterrence. People see a camera that's very different from seeing a person actually standing there, and so and also they know that there's the camera's not going to be able to do anything, so they can just break the camera and keep going. So we needed to have something that could be something like a person in terms of its presence, but then it also had the monitoring abilities of the technology. So as I said, this is an interesting case in a new business model that's going to probably be more common. This case does a really good job of discussing the issues that they ran into. So the first was, of course, this human veto, and a lot of you really zeroed in on that. But the problem, of the many different problems, is one of trust, and people. From security guards themselves who don't really want to jeopardize their reputation or see themselves replaced, or people who just really don't want to work with robots in that kind of environment. They don't have the trust. So humans can always just say no, and then they don't make the sale. They also talked about the challenges with market focus. Okay, so who needs this kind of surveillance, and who is likely to adopt it? So they operate in Silicon Valley, which is very experimental, and so this is also a place that has a lot of data centers, and so they focused on warehouses, which are everywhere. The case mentioned the percentage of American land that is covered with warehouse. It's actually kind of surprising. Data centers, which are becoming more and more common. So you have these large facilities that don't have a lot of humans on board, so they require that security. Also, really high value assets there, so you have to guard those. And they were talking about athletic facilities, that is, stadiums at night when nothing is going on there. So they have to have that kind of security too. Another problem they were addressing was how exactly they were going to go to market. So they explored this idea of direct sales, where we're gonna sell the the robot as a service to the companies that need robot as a service. But another option they had was, of course, indirect sales. So they said, okay, well, why don't we work with the security firms that are also supplying security services? And so that way there's a certain level of expertise and the relationships that are already in there, and the security firms can use their own expertise to kind of use the robot to enhance their expertise. And so they would be the ones to actually sell and deploy the robot. The problem with that, of course, was agency issues, and security firms are probably less likely to recommend the robot, so they wouldn't have those aggressive sales. So both direct sales and indirect sales had their advantages and disadvantages. The other interesting thing, and I thought this could be the potential. The problem that could potentially really limit the growth of robotics companies, and that is just the cost economics of it. So they were selling these robotic services to save these companies money on, they are expensive. Security guards are expensive, but it's not like we're talking about CFO salaries here. But the robots themselves have a lot of expense, and there's a very, very long cash conversion cycle. And so what that means is the way they operate is these robots, in order to be useful, have a certain amount of customization that they have to go through. So they couldn't make these robots made to stock, right? They had to make them made to order. So they would receive an order from a company, and they would analyze where they need to be, and then they would design this robot, and then they would order the parts. So they would have to pay cash for those parts, and then there would be a lead time for receiving those parts. Then they would assemble the parts together, and then they would do the custom engineering on site. And so we're already looking at a lot of cost and a lot of cash invested. And then because they sell it as a service, that is, it's a repeated bill, so it's not like a one-time big payment where they're making their money back. So from the time they start spending money on the robot to the time they are actually making back the money that they spent initially on all those parts, it's a very long cycle. And I don't know if Cobalt has really resolved this problem yet, but one thing they're doing now is there's that classic pivot, which is they're not just in the business of providing robots. They say, well, we're a security company, we're an analytics company. We're kind of emphasizing the fact that we're a solution that has more pieces to it than just the robot itself. So so a lot of different themes were addressed. Different questions that people talked about in the discussions this week. A lot of people wanted to address this whole hybrid human plus AI kind of way of doing things. I think a recurring theme throughout has been that these things are just going to do some tasks, and we need to have a human in the loop there somewhere. And so this question although now it's in the context of robotics, where the robot is doing, in the case of Cobalt, the robot is actually there on site and doing some analysis. That is being uploaded, and then when necessary, a human analyst is actually monitoring this and doing something about this. So there were lots of examples of where people see this kind of model working, where you have a robot doing one set of routine kinds of things, and then escalation to a human. There was one case of where somebody was talking about drone warfare being like this, where you have a lot of drones used to each need their own driver. Now there's enough AI that there can be one driver where things, complicated, novel situations just kind of are addressed by an individual. So this is a good model for customer service, where you start off with the chatbot, routine interactions, and then at some point the human comes in, tier 3 or whatever. Same thing with security analysis. So AI can do some security detection, maybe even some intervention. But then when there's a high chance of something very unusual happening, very strange anomaly that could have a lot of serious impacts, then it gets escalated to a human. And so this is similar to the model of Cobalt, which is the robots do the patrolling, and then there are remote human specialists that interpret and intervene where necessary. A lot of people like to talk about this human veto issue, and I do like that term, human veto. A lot of issues of trust, people. I don't know if I mentioned this in other places, but people were kicking over the robots that were doing inventory in Walmart. There's a certain level of reluctance. Also institutional issues, which interestingly came up. So for example, it's difficult to figure out how exactly you pay for these things given certain budget constraints, that different departments have different budgets, and how would they figure out how to change this particular allocations to make it possible to actually put an expensive robot into production. Also, institutional inertia. Organizations, when they get big, they tend to have processes that are very difficult to move. And then, of course, political constraints. If certain people are in power who have some reason why the robot should not be adopted, that's always going to be an impediment. A lot of interesting ideas in discussion about robots, and this tends to be one area where people like to get imaginative. I've seen cases where somebody was working at a gym and they said, "Hey, let's get a robot to re-rack these weights," and I saw no reason. It had to be a durable robot if it's going to be carrying 45-pound plates, but that's not out of the question. So examples are we have somebody who works at for Amazon Web Services in an engineering facility, and he envisioned a robot walking equipment rows to identify alarms, verifying environmental conditions and checking for abnormal sounds or leaks. So with current sensor technology, it's feasible. These tasks are essential but repetitive and prone to human error or delayed detection, the same problems that were addressed by Cobalt. Robotics could assist with thermal imaging inspections, leak detection, and verifying mechanical component status in areas that are difficult or time-consuming for humans to access frequently. Yeah, so you get these dangerous environments where robots, provide, they don't care how much exposure to radiation they have, so that you can send them in there like that. And also all these sensors can take care of these important monitoring tasks. Someone else mentioned, so in a retail facility, why not have a service robot? So customers can ask questions, do you have this in blue? Given the store's proprietary data to Cobalt Robot can help it to customize customer suggestions, especially for those with store accounts. So the robot would be like a human helper, would be trained in human interaction, be designed there to be helpful, but then it could also hook into inventory systems and even people's account if they're willing to provide an ID or something. And also somebody suggested, okay, work in schools that require lots of inspections, for the HVAC systems, lighting. Why not just pool, county or district resources to purchase a robot that could go school to school and then just spend a day doing all these inspections, and that would cut down on some expenses there. And finally, somebody suggested campus tours. So, what about if you work at a university? Uh, there are groups of prospective students and their parents who like to kind of look around the campus and hear all about it. Well, is it possible for a robot to do this? And I don't see why not. I'd be kind of surprised if there aren't at least optional tours. So Stanford or MIT where they're building robots. I think that's a nice option. But that brings up an interesting question of like what they should look like. Robot design, there's more and more effort of industrial design is being expended on, well, how do people respond to robots? How should they look? So if we were going to give a campus tour to a prospective student, we would probably want something humanoid, but small. Have you noticed that? Like they don't make them 7 feet tall because that's going to be something kind of uncomfortable and terrifying. But so they always kind of cap them at 5 feet, make them very friendly. Often give them a female voice. That people tend to respond to that better. But that's if your objective is to win them over. This robot on the right is a police robot, and you can see that the design of that had very different kind of considerations, and you can see what the reaction to that would be. Kind of like the 1980s RoboCop, designed to be a major deterrence and not a warm and friendly creature. But as these things start to appear more and more in our regular interactions and in our workplaces, we're going to have a nice variety.